President Harry Truman used to keep a sign on his desk that read, "What stops here?" In that, he ultimately meant that the President of the United States was responsible for answering and being responsible for national crises that plague the nation. But ultimately, the President is accountable for the state of affairs. Senators, in this debate, the buck will not stop at the President's desk, it will stop at ours. So first, let's talk about what actual property sanctions would do to the U.S. economy. And the fact of the matter is that affirming this legislation is going to destabilize the American housing market. Now, Section 1A of this legislation reads that any country that provides food aid to North Korea will be subject to property-based sanctions. The Council on Foreign Relations in September of 2017 writes that since before the Korean War, China's trade agreements with Korea have constituted food and agriculture in the billions, which is a direct violation of this legislation. Now, here's why this matters. China's U.S. property-based investments are in U.S. housing. As Reuters corroborates in May of 2016, between 2010 and 2015, Chinese buyers bought $93 billion in residential real estate, nearly $208 billion in mortgage-backed securities, and nearly $17 billion in commercial real estate. When the United States starts to assert its authority over hundreds of thousands of deeds on mortgages by implementing things like property-based sanctions, Chinese investors are going to panic. They're going to sell, and they're going to drop dramatically the price of these bonds, which will effectively destabilize the American housing market. But truthfully, this impact goes even further. We're not just destabilizing the American housing market, we're affecting the individual mortgages of hundreds of thousands of American citizens. You see, Chinese investors have legal protections. If the value of their investment drops by more than 15%, the entire contract itself is voided, which means when we affirm legislation like this and deteriorate the profits of Chinese investors, hundreds of thousands of mortgages are now under the scrutiny of, or now have the opportunity to become voided. So when hundreds of thousands of Americans possibly face homelessness, when tens upon thousands of Americans, because of that homelessness, now face unemployment, Mr. Knudsen, Mrs. Cohen, Mr. Cohen, Mrs. Wakefield, I'm holding you accountable. But more importantly, this legislation is going to expose classified information to the international community and threaten the stability of the world at large. Section 1C reads that cooperation between North Korea and Iran on nuclear weapons initiates sanctions. If we affirm this legislation and this bill leaves the subcommittee and goes to the Senate floor, it becomes public domain. In case we forgot, the classified memo we just got reads, obviously this info cannot become public. When we affirm this legislation, the information does become public, and North Korea and Iran both find out about the fact that every person in this room knows about the sanctions. And the Office of the Director of National Intelligence talks about how harmful this is. This is so harmful because when North Korea and Iran find out that we have this intelligence, they bring their operations underground. They deteriorate our ability as the United States to continue our intelligence operations, and it makes it far harder for the United States to prove to the international community that there is an actual crisis. At the end of the day, representatives, this legislation doesn't only deteriorate the American economy, but it is a foreign policy disaster that will harm national security. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Mr. J. Cohen.
Okay, so let's talk about property sanctions. Do they actually affect the investors of the country or just the country's assets itself?
They are going to affect the country's investors because the country's assets, like Chinese bureaucrats, these are the people that have investments in American
but
housing.
is it that China as a government is investing in the housing market, or is it just
First
Chinese
of
assets like that?
all, property-based sanctions are going to affect investors and bureaucrats within the Chinese government. It is the bureaucrats in the Chinese government that are making these investments.
But is it the government that's doing the investment?
Yes, it is bureaucrats in the government that is doing the investment.
That's not my question.
That's how we squeeze China, Senator. That's how we make these sanctions effective.
Okay, let's talk about China. Ms. Cohen, Mr. Cohen, and myself have both proven that China is starting to side with the United States and that the affirmative world pushes them over the edge. How are they not going to cooperate with us?
Senator, first of all, the reason why they're not going to cooperate, and this is another misconception in this round, let's not forget that China holds the deed to the debt of the United States of America.
Okay, yes, but also when sanctions were put on, they started to move towards here. So again,
like
can you provide what
senators have brought up, China's policies are volatile. This war is unprecedented, and you cannot predict the actions of Xi Jinping.
Question for Ms. Labs.